My name is Mark Valenzuela. I'm an associate professor of civil engineering, and I wear a few other hats. But the hat that brings me here today is as one of the coaches for the GAP Tiny Homes team. So very happy that everyone could be here. And then
I'm John East. I am the other coach. One of my other hats, I guess, like you were saying. A recent graduate of UE, so this is what I've been doing now besides working.
I'm Annie Stentenagel. I'm a senior here at UE, and I'm a student executive for the Institute. So I help out the GAP teams and kind of serve as a resource.
I'm Jill Grossman, and I direct the Institute for Global Enterprise, which coordinates our GAP program, among other things.
Erin Lewis, Program Director at the Institute, work on the GAP program.
Brian Kearney, Executive Director of Aurora. We're a homeless service agency here in Evansville.
Jonna Jennings-Smith, I'm the Director of Grants and Sponsor Programs and IRB Chair and Administrator.
I'm Sheree Linhart. I'm Coordinator for the Office of Veterans Affairs, and I'm interested in this topic. That's why I'm here.
Great. And then we have a person behind the
Oh, I'm Cindy Kelly. I work at the Institute for Global Enterprise, and we coordinate the GAP program, among other things.
We have so many hats in this. Yeah, and then of course the students will introduce themselves here in a little bit, but just again to reiterate our thanks for coming here and giving the students feedback. And looking forward to the dialogue that will ensue. Anything else that we should take care of before?
No, I think, again, just thanks for everyone who's coming here. And I mean, I know we're missing somebody who was supposed to come from Henderson, but the video will be available. So that will be another way to share the ideas and insights from the team with those who weren't able to attend today.
Okay, great.
So I assume we fill this out at the end. Is that what
Yes.
I've not been part of this
Yeah,
before,
so what you have in front of you is an evaluation form that we do evaluations for all of our GAP projects, and that's a way for us to give feedback to the students, but also a way for us to assess how we're doing in our program. And so that will be important to take a few minutes after the team gives their presentation, after we've had some questions and discussion, to make sure that you have an opportunity to give them some feedback.
Great. And then I'll say a few words while Casey is taking a drink. Just a few words. And so without further ado, I'll just turn it over to the students.
Okay. All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Casey Thompson, and I'm a senior civil engineering major.
I'm Rebecca Olsen, and I'm a sociology and ethics and social change major.
And I'm Caroline Thompson. I'm a sophomore neuroscience and psychology major.
And we are going to be giving a presentation on or outlining how we are trying to solve this issue and make sure we can get some homes for the homeless. And before we get into the main meat of the project, we're going to be going over just some foundational stuff and some background information. So how did this whole thing even get started? So, not too long ago, a group of UE students went to the Cardboard City, which is an event held here on the UE campus, and it is put on to increase awareness of the homelessness issue in Evansville. And from this, one student, whose name is John East, he decided to join the Collegiate Changemaker Challenge. And he was so motivated by what he saw at that Cardboard City that he wanted to make a difference. And so he entered that challenge with the idea to bring affordable and efficient housing to the homeless. And his ultimate goal was eventually to have it turn into this, which we have here, which is our GAP class, to hopefully make it a real thing.
So the idea was to build tiny homes for the homeless. So that brings up the question of what is a tiny home? And typically they are about 100 to 400 square feet, but no larger than 500. And they come in a variety of forms, shapes, and designs. And compared to the average American home, they are a lot smaller than the 2,600 square feet. And so in the top corner you have one that is made out of a shipping container. And this one's on wheels, and then this was actually one that was built It's a Katrina cabin, or cottage, that was built after Hurricane Katrina to help house victims of Hurricane Katrina. So the idea is basically that it's simple living and efficient space with a reduced carbon footprint and more financially efficient. And the tiny house movement kind of got its, kind of picked up speed with the financial crisis back in 2007, 2008, and it was an affordable housing option. So one of the resources for this project was Tiny Homes in a Big City, which was a book that detailed the Cass Community Social Services tiny house village in Detroit, and the book kind of explains the process that they went through and just building the tiny homes and the applications for the homeless to get into those houses.
So before going into the meat of our project, I'm just going to go over real quick what we're going to be covering. So first we're going to talk about our areas of individual research, so we're each responsible for a different portion. And then we'll be going to the suggestions that we will be giving for the next class, and then the goals that they'll need to achieve, hopefully, in the next class. So my area of research was, who exactly are we trying to help with this program here in Evansville? And to even answer that question, we had to understand what the problem was. And that problem is how people fall into homelessness. And we immediately learned that it's not an easy thing to solve. It's this thing that we all think should be easy, that these people, there are people that don't have homes, and we should provide homes for them. But you run into issues of, even though they say that, they don't want them in their backyard, or they don't want to actually help. So it's really difficult. And then there are the misconceptions that, oh, people are either just lazy, or they're drug addicts, or lots of different things. But in reality, those affected are, as I know personally, being a veteran, that it's very difficult to go from a world that is completely structured into a world that isn't structured. And that can be very, very confusing, and some people don't find any way to get out of that. And also just hardworking individuals, people who work every day but will just have an emergency or a large bill, and then they fall below the poverty line and lose their house. So, and even though there are amazing services out there in Evansville and other places, there can still be a gap in services. So there's still a group normally that is not being helped, and that's the group that we wanted to focus on. So we wanted to serve veterans in the Evansville area that were homeless. So we had to ask, who is already being served? And there's an organization here in Evansville called ECHO, and they provide affordable health care for the homeless and uninsured, and they also provide housing options such as Lucas Place 1, which is for families, Lucas Place 2, which is for individuals, and then there's also HVRP, Homeless Veterans Reintegration Program, and that's for those veterans who have just gotten out and they're living on their mom's couch, which isn't a bad thing, I was there too, but gives them resources with resumes, helping them find a job, maybe them getting them into college. So since we identified who is already being served, we had to identify who is not being served. And we called around and we did some research, and we found there's this group of individuals that is receiving Social Security and is homeless, and they don't really fit any of these criteria. They don't meet any of the requirements to get into any of these programs, where they might have mental or social issues that are not quite bad enough to get into these programs. And so they can't really get work due to these issues, and even if they did, it wouldn't really offset their Social Security, which would then go away. So they fall into this perpetual state of homelessness where they can't really get out of it and have no desire to get out of it.
Okay, so one of the other things we focused on was location. Where could we implement our idea of these tiny homes? And two things quickly became apparent to us. This was the Promise Zone and the land bank. The Promise Zone is a designated area within Evansville that works to facilitate partnerships to help solve and address these problems that community members have identified. So one of these priorities was actually access to affordable housing. So that directly relates to our project. And then the land bank. The land bank is basically a collection of properties. These properties are either unused or unusable. And the goal of the land bank is to return these properties back to use, to make them productive again. And looking at that, we were given 177 properties. So taking those two things, we looked for properties that fell within both the Promise Zone and were offered by the land bank. If you look here, you'll see the outline of the Promise Zone in black, and then in blue are all the properties that fell within the Promise Zone offered by the land bank. So 81 out of the 177 properties met both criteria, so we were able to omit 96 properties. And then we wanted to narrow it down further, and we came up with 5 factors which would really influence the location. And these were proximity to necessities, available space, poverty rates, crime rates, and then the cost. So we identified 3 common necessities: healthcare, transportation, and nutrition. For healthcare, we measured the nearest distance to the nearest hospital. We also measured how many facilities surrounded the property itself and the distance from them. Transportation, so how close was the nearest bus route. And then nutrition, so the availability of supermarkets, grocery stores, and even gas stations. And then we ranked those based on the quality of nutrition you can get. Clearly you'll get a little bit better nutrition from a supermarket than a gas station. The next thing we looked at was space that was available. So our goal was not just to develop a place for these people to live. It was to develop something that they felt like they belonged, even a community, foster independence. And so by doing that, we would need a little bit more space. So we looked at how close these plots offered by the land bank were to each other. Were they next to each other? Were they across the street? Or all the way across Evansville? And then we also looked at the size of the properties. So if it was a large enough property, we could put 1 or 2 houses, maybe more. That was something we had to look into. We also took into account the rates of poverty which surrounded the properties themselves. One influential factor why we did this was food deserts. Typically in areas of high poverty, it's difficult to have access to accessible or affordable food. And then, of course, areas of high poverty typically have a higher risk of exposure to violence, which actually jumps into the next thing we looked into, which were crime rates. Again, you'll see the Promise Zone, the properties available, and the yellow and red are crime hotspots within Evansville. So we were looking to avoid these areas of high crime simply because of the negative impacts that living in a high crime area can have on your health, both physically, emotionally, and psychologically. And then of course we just wanted to ensure the safety as best as we could for the residents who would be partaking in this project. The goal was not only to just develop a place for them to live, but again, develop a sense of security and belonging. And then the last thing we looked at was how we could make this the most cost efficient. The land bank offered one of the best opportunities for this, simply because the properties you could purchase for $100 each. And then there were transfer costs, but that applied to the situation, depending. And then the
Second thing we had to take into account was pre-existing structures that might exist on the properties themselves. So many of them did not have houses, but some of them did, and most of them were not livable. So we had to think about the costs of removing or demolishing them as well.
So these are the zoning codes for the residential districts in Evansville. So the minimum floor area required is 720 square feet. And the tiny house that we were looking for the size to be was 140 square feet, which if you look at the tape on the wall, this area is 140 square feet. And then the minimum lot size, 5,000 to 6,000 square feet, and only being able to cover 30 to 40% of that lot. That leaves a lot of land left that could be used to build more homes. So that leads into the next segment of our presentation. We faced a lot of obstacles in Evansville. The lack of available space. There's not a lot of land available that doesn't already have houses and businesses, and the areas that are available, there's not a large space where we could develop a community. It would have to be individual homes just dispersed throughout Evansville. And the zoning restrictions, as I mentioned, limit us to larger homes and a lot of leftover land. And then accessing the target population, it's not easy to reach out to these veterans. And then with community reactions, the acceptance of doing this and the idea of not in my backyard, that people don't necessarily want homeless housing in their neighborhood. So later on in the project, we were approached by a member of the Henderson community who shared with us the advantages of perhaps moving to Henderson, and shifting our focus to Henderson kind of reinvigorated the project. So in Henderson, there is a population need that falls into a different gap. There are 2 homeless shelters in Henderson. One serves men and the other women and children. So families are split up if they are going into these shelters. So to be able to provide housing for these families and keep them together would be a great opportunity. And there's a local interest in this project. And the availability of space would give us the opportunity to implement the community. So these are the zoning codes in Henderson. So it did not appear that there was a minimum floor area, which means that we would be able to build the tiny house, more tiny houses. And then the minimum lot size is a lot smaller, and we can cover a lot more of the lot.
So from all of our research and everything that we went through, we will be making the suggestion that next semester they focus their attention on Henderson, Kentucky. And that's only for now. So this isn't a thing. We will not be coming back to Evansville. We would eventually definitely like to return to Evansville, but we are viewing Henderson as more of a proving ground. So the ability to get this idea up and running, and then hopefully it works perfectly well, and then we can bring it back to Evansville and maybe even act it more quickly than we would if we tried to go straight into Evansville. And as we stated So, and our focus will also change from veterans to trying to keep families together, so providing these homes for families who, as I said earlier, just might have missed a bill and have become homeless. We've also been able to lay the foundation for next semester, so the things that they will be needing to work on are definitely getting the questionnaires out, and these questionnaires will be asking them various questions on what kind of services they think are important, maybe what they would like to see in the homes themselves, the amenities that they would like nearby, and really we need that before we can do too much more. And there's also an IRB proposal that they'll have to do with Evansville before they can get that questionnaire out. They'll also have to decide on the kind of requirements they want for application, and we have started that this semester. We've talked about it, but it is something they need to make concrete. And then also finalize the location inside that Audubon land bank in Henderson. Audubon Reserve area. So the things we've covered, we've talked about how it got started, what exactly a tiny home is, our different areas of research, the obstacles that we faced, the opportunities that Henderson will give us, and what next semester can look forward to. At this point, we'd like to obviously continue the discussion and answer any questions that you may have. Thank you very much.
I have a question. So looking at it from a funding standpoint, where do you see funding coming from, and what about sustainability?
Funding is something, since we're moving to Henderson, a lot of the problems that we saw arising with Evansville, like demolishing or even getting property from the land bank, a lot of that will be put to the side until we decide to come back to Evansville. So funding will actually be largely a project for next semester. And then what was the second part of the project?
Sustainability of the project.
Sustainability.
Will there be like I know you guys haven't quite gotten into this yet, but will there be a charge for living in the tiny homes, or, you know, how will that work?
Yeah, there was, we were looking at both of those options. So I think we'd probably keep both options available. I think we were leaning more towards a very small payment every month, and that would probably go towards upkeep, and we're talking about maybe even staff on the area, so.
And just as you were talking about the alternative energy, I was thinking what a cool project to combine those two to make the houses sustainable themselves, as far as like solar power or something like that. So
That'd be fantastic.
Okay, good point.
And I think we even had discussed with the folks in Henderson that Kennergy might actually be a little bit more open to some of the solar power than perhaps Spectrum might be. But again, that's something to explore a bit further to go.
Maybe following up on that question too, did you guys have a chance to look at any of the tiny home communities that are being implemented in other areas? How they set it up? Do they have some initial grant funding, and how do they make it sustainable?
So the book Caroline talked a little bit about was a great resource for us to use. It was in Detroit, and what did they do exactly? I know I can't remember what they did for funding, but I believe part of the application process was sorting through residents who had a source of income, at least a tiny bit, in order to continue their way of life with the place of residence.
As far as starting up though, I'm not sure how they started, but I definitely do think they had some kind of monthly payment that they were paying towards, and would eventually pay it off and then own a house. I think it was after 7 years, something like that.
In the beginning of your presentation, there's a picture, I think, of the community that's already established in Washington. Do you know who administers that? Like, is it an agency in the city or a nonprofit, or you've been in touch with them? That's an interesting photo. Yeah, Olympia. Do you know who manages that?
I don't remember. It was also mentioned in the book. They had information on a lot of different communities throughout the U.S. But each one kind of does it differently. There's some that are managed by a nonprofit that just started something like this. Like Cass Community Social Services worked on the one in Detroit. They got that started. And forget what the other ones were.
Maybe next semester we could get that contact information so they at least have like a call sheet to start with. Like that.
And Cass Community started with private donation. They created a nonprofit and started with private donations and grants, so that's how they began.
Question.
Yeah, sure.
So do you see, very quiet. So do you see this eventually, this course progressing on and on until there's actually construction and one of the classes will begin in actually constructing tiny homes? Or do you see the class just getting the background work together and getting it started and there's other organizations or agencies like Habitat for Humanity that'll build them? Or who builds this, do you see, do you think?
I saw it going all the way to us building it, so, I mean, I think it can really pick up traction and then have large groups and maybe with the help of Habitat for Humanity, but I definitely saw UE students going and helping building these things.
Yeah, with so much that we do with community service outreach from Residence Life, Jackie's area, who knows, this could be one of our community service things that we have groups of students that go and work on tiny homes that UE is building through the Tiny Homes Initiative. That could be a really cool way for lots of organizations to go and do some community service time, like the honors program is looking to donate time. They've identified 4 different organizations they want to go help with, like the UE Give Back, but kind of in a mini version. So, I mean, maybe you could have a lot of help here with that when you get to that stage. I wonder how long it'll be until you get to that. Do you ever, how can you project how long this class is going to go? I mean, till the end of time? Because it's one semester, you just get little pieces done. It seems the way that works, right?
I mean, I can tell you from an engineering standpoint that the planning phase can be fairly extensive, anywhere from, 9 months, anywhere. I mean, once you have the land and know where you want to build it and start the design process, and I mean that's just the design process. So
you don't have a design yet, do you? You're waiting to get more feedback with your research.
Right.
That's good because I could see where it'd be real exciting to get into design, and what if it doesn't meet the need of the people you're building them for?
Exactly.
It's a real cautious spot you'd be. I'm done. Good job, guys.
I had a question about the zoning requirements for Evansville. I think it said 720 was like the Evansville requirement. Does that mean that you could put like 5 homes on, you couldn't, they don't have
I think
That's for one building wall, right?
so like you can't just have a shed on a huge lot. Can we change the law?
Well,
we're probably going to have to.
probably,
That's my question is how do you,
Zoning board.
Brian probably knows something.
yeah.
Yeah, I think you can present something concrete. It can't just be an idea, but the zoning board would probably consider it and might even pass it. It could be considered controversial on one hand, but I think our current city council, for sure, and those that are involved are very open to serving the homeless, and I've had to go in front of them in the last 2 years 4 times, and everything has been 9-0, I think, so in our favor.